Good evening and welcome to the Edible Gardens Workshop Series. This is the Garden Bugs class. I am going to give you a quick introduction here. This is the program on Harvest Pierce County's website. If you have any questions about, oops, let me move that. Where this recording is going to end up, if you use this page to register, if you go all the way down to the bottom, you can see the handouts for the classes. So these are uploaded already if you want to follow along, or you can click on them later. And when the links are available, they will be on their website soon. My name is Mary Coleman. I'm an environmental educator with Pierce County Planning and Public Works. And we are part of the environmental education program. So if you want to learn more about that, Erin, my coworker here tonight, is going to help me out moderating the class. Everybody say hi to Erin.
Good evening, everyone.
And he's going to help me see what's going on in the chat. He's going to drop a link if he hasn't done it already. This is our website if you want to know more about our program. We have partnered with Harvest Pierce County, that is housed within the Pierce Conservation District. To make this series, we're on season 11, so for a long time, and let's change it up over a few years to make it more what everybody wants based on your feedback, so we do appreciate that. The name of our class is officially Garden Bugs, Diseases, and Non-Toxic Alternatives. It got a little shortened for promotional purposes this year. That was kind of an accident. But this is the full name of the class. We are hoping to cover all things pest-related and a little bit on diseases. They're a lot harder to identify. We'll hit that in the last part of the class. And then non-toxic alternatives to dealing with those pests, but really prevention is key. How many of you have been to one of our classes this year so far? I am a big fan of the reaction button. If you haven't used that before in your buttons for Zoom, if you give me a thumbs up or a green check mark, I can see those. Oh, nice. Many of you have been to one of our classes before. Awesome. How many of you have been to this class in the past? Anybody? Nobody? One, maybe? Awesome. Okay. Well, here we are most of the way through our series. We're on the bugs class. If you haven't already taken a soil class, I highly recommend you go back and watch that recording. That having proper soil is really going to help your plants be able to defend themselves against things that might negatively affect them. And then putting your garden to bed, which will happen in October. Another great one to make sure you set your garden up for success the next spring when we go to plant. Here's our agenda for tonight. We're going to go over basic stuff. Insect damage versus disease problems. How do you tell them apart? Insect IDs, prevention and remedies, and then disease prevention and remedies. These are the handouts. You don't have to open them now. We're going to go through these in fine detail. This is me and my information. Should you want to contact me, feel free to reach out or call. If you have questions, you want to take pictures and send them to me. I am not an expert by any means, but I do know a lot about garden bugs. This is one piece of what I do for my job. We, the environmental educators, primarily go into schools throughout Pierce County, primary and secondary schools. We guest speak at some community colleges and the universities here. And then we do community programs in the evenings and weekends, mostly teaching about waste reduction and recycling, gardening, composting, a little bit of surface water issues. And then, of course, in teaching about gardening, we want to teach people how to take care of their gardens and to not pollute our beautiful environment here where we live in Pierce County. So this is my class. That's it for the slides for me. So I'm going to switch over here to our notes. So I don't want to forget that. So I'm going to close that. This class is specific to vegetable gardening here in the Pacific Northwest on the west side of the Cascades. our environment here is very different than when you cross the Cascades. And the issues that we get with our gardens here is very different than our surrounding area. And because of the length of the class, I can only cover just so much stuff. So we're only covering vegetable gardens. Fruit trees have their own issues. I recommend going back and watching the fruit tree recording and looking at those class notes. And there's lots of resources from WSU Extension on fruit tree issues if you Google them. So I'm not hitting on ornamental plants, I'm not hitting on fruits, just vegetable gardening. All right, so let's see. I want to hear a little bit more from you all. I see they're coming from all over the area. That's great. Give me a thumbs up if you can find the reaction button if you are new to gardening, vegetable gardening. Let's see, 4. Okay. Erin, can you clear those? And then give me a thumbs up if you are a veteran gardener. Maybe you've been gardening for 10 years or more. Anybody? Couple of those. Awesome. 3. So I am by no means a know everything expert when it comes to this. You all might have more knowledge than I do. So feel free to chime in if things have worked for you or if you have other advice for folks. We will utilize the chat a bunch, and we are a fairly small group. How many do we have, Erin?
16, including us.
Nice. So you can unmute if you want to clarify any questions or whatnot. Awesome. All right. I think I got a hold of that. So I would like you all to think of an animal, any animal. First thing that pops to your head, type it in the chat. What was the first animal you thought of? Raccoon, horse, cat, cat, squirrel, bobcat. Tardigrades, thank you, Erin. Tortoise, elephant, chicken, a bug, deer. Nice. All right. The reason I ask this question when I teach this class is because most people, when they think about animals and protecting wildlife, they think about big mammals. And in our notes here, the very back page, I have this pie chart that lists all the animals on the planet. And here we have this little sliver pulled out of all the vertebrate animals, animals with a spine. And here's this little tiny yellow sliver that have the mammals. They are such a tiny portion of what make up all the life on our planet, but that's what we think of. There's many other things on this planet. So the rest of this circle are invertebrates, animals without a spine. And most of those, if you can see the circle here, are insects. Insects make up a bulk of all life on our planet, and they are holding up that giant food web. They are so successful. They are on every continent, in every biosphere, in every habitat. And we're losing them at good proportions, which is unfortunate. So we can do whatever we can in our gardens to not create more of the problem and have chemicals that would run off, because here in Western Washington, it rains all the time and water carries everything we do on land out to our nearby ditches and creeks that go into our rivers that go right into the Puget Sound. So we don't want to contribute to an already occurring problem. So insects are hugely beneficial. They're a big part of our environment here where we live. So we want to care for the ones that are helping us out. There's only a few things that can cause problems, and usually if your plants are healthy and you got good soil, they're not even going to cause that much of a problem for your garden. Okay, so we're going to start with what if we have a problem on our plants and we can't tell if it's critter damage or if it's a disease problem? Well, first of all, we're going to assume that you have healthy soil, because malnutrition of the plant can also look like a disease, and that can be really tricky. So as long as you've got healthy soil, maybe you test it once a year, you get little soil test kits from the garden center, or some of the big box stores have them too. Test your soil to make sure it has everything that it should have. Assuming you have healthy soil, then you start looking at the plant. Is there signs of critter damage? Are the leaves, are they hiding somebody on the underside? A lot of our plants get munched on and they hide underneath. Are there chew marks? Are there slime trails? We all know what that one's from, right? Is it chewed loose of its roots? Sometimes that happens. Is it localized? Is it just one single attack? Versus signs of disease are more spots, being discolored. It's kind of falling over. It's, if you plant things in a row, it tends to, you can see it moving down the row. The entire plant looks like it's in bad shape. That's going to be more disease problems. So let's say we saw signs of critter damage and we think that's it. We're going to go this route. What do we do next? Well, most of the critter damage are from insects, not all of them. Things like slugs, we'll cover that in a minute. But just to go a recap 101 on bugs, because this will help you identify and hopefully be able to really look at an insect and not get creeped out by it immediately, and then be able to identify it and properly treat your garden. So here we have a basic bug here with 3 body parts, okay? If it has 2 body parts, you're dealing with an arachnid, and that is a totally different issue, most of which don't bother plants. And if we have 3 body parts, who remembers what this top body part is called? We're going to fill this in together. Anybody? It's the head. Yes. How about this middle piece? Anyone remember, going back to elementary school, what body part this is? Anybody? These. It's a pre-quiz. Thorax. Thank you.
Got it. Thorax.
Woohoo! And this bigger part down here would be the. Anybody?
Yep, the butt.
Yes. Good job. Thank you. And the abdomen. Yes. So arachnids just have 2. They have like a megathorax and a head. And this is important because some insects come in different proportions. Sometimes, like if you think of a ladybug, you almost can't tell the head from the thorax. They're both so tiny, and then they have this huge abdomen, which houses all their reproductive organs and important guts. And then getting to specific parts, these are pointing to their what? Antenna, yes. And what's in the thorax? That is what's holding everything together. Everything is attached to that thorax. And next, well, let me talk about this antenna real quick, because they obviously don't have a nose or ears like we do. So these antennae are doing the job of what our nose and ears would do. These antennae are so sophisticated. This is how they communicate with each other. And unfortunately, if your plants are sad, if they're malnourished, if you went on vacation and forgot to set up a watering plan for them, if the dog crashed through it and knocked it over and it's a little broken, it might be sad. And when plants are sad, they give off pheromones that we can't pick up, but insects totally can. And they're just like, oh, 4 o'clock over there, Susan's house. There's some corn and it's gonna be delicious. Let's go get it. And they tell all their friends, and then they show up and they go for the weakest of the herd. It's just what they do. They can also smell a little bit with their feet, but that's another story. This line here is pointing at their eyes, right? Not just any eyes, but they have compound eyes, which are very different from our eyes. And a lot of them make up their whole head, or most of their head. So they can see us coming from any direction. And if you try to swat at them or catch them or squish them, they're like, I see you coming. And they just like move on, right? It's really hard to catch most bugs. And with these compound eyes, they also see ultraviolet light. So your garden looks very different to them than it does to us. They can leave trails and tracks for each other on where they are going, and we can't see that stuff. Just makes them extra cool. And here we are pointing at their, how many legs do insects have? 6 legs, or 3 pair. If you're looking at something and it has more legs than that, it is not an insect, which means they have a different life cycle, which means they have, they're eating different stuff, totally different animals. Insects are going to have 6 legs. And hard to tell what this one's pointing at, but I'm trying to point at their wings. And most insects have 2 pairs of wings, not all of them, like bees and flies, but most of them have 2 pairs of wings that they only get once they're adults. Okay, we got our basics. Remember all this stuff? What is that big change called that insects go through? Amphibians too. But what is, does anybody remember what the big word is? Anybody? Yes. Thank you, Liz.
Liz for the win.
There are 2 kinds of metamorphosis. And if you notice here, this is kind of the one I think most of us are more familiar with, where we go from eggs to these larvae or grubs to this pupal stage to an adult. And notice they all look completely different in each stage. So we call this complete metamorphosis. And this is a little tricky because they can do different things in these stages. They eat different things. They can do different damage or even be beneficial. So in this grub or larva stage, they are often eating our plants. They pupate over time, and then they're adults and like, oh, you're a pollinator. And then they go lay their egg. And some can spend a lot of time in the larval stage and not much time in the adult stage. Think of the classic 17-year cicada. Have you all heard of those? We don't have them here. They're famous down south. But they literally spend 17 years underground in their larval stage just eating and hanging out, getting plump. And they emerge after 17 years in the ground and become adults just to fly around and reproduce. They don't even eat anything. And then they die within a couple of days. Amazing. Some insects will spend not much time in the larval stage, and then they'll morph really quickly and be adults for a long time. So they can do this in different stages, different amounts of time, different places. Some are aquatic and live in different places. So it often means we have 2 different animals that we have to learn that's really the same thing. It can be tricky. Whereas this one, notice how when they hatch, they look like mini versions of the adults. And they go through the same morph stages and they molt, just like if you ever see a crab molt on the beach. They're losing their exoskeleton, right, that holds them all together. And they shed and they get bigger, and it's not until they reach the adult stage that they get their wings and can reproduce. And again, they can spend different amounts of time in these stages. And sometimes they can go through this cycle several times in a growing season. Depends on the bug. So this one, they don't change that much. So we call this incomplete metamorphosis. All right. Basics, are we good? Okay. So let's go back to notes. I want to introduce you to the 2 documents that are uploaded to the website. I have here what are called the class notes, and if you've been to the previous classes, we know we have these class notes for every single class. And then I also have, so this is all the background information you could ever want. Hopefully you don't need to take too many notes. Everything should be here. And then I have critter and disease information. This is a list I compiled with some experienced gardeners back in the day. We made some modifications to it over the years. We got together all these books and resources. And how many of you have bought garden books on pests or diseases before? Yes. Erin can put a link to Edible Garden's website to find those handouts. Remember, they're at the very bottom of the page under the class listing. Thank you. Well, if you've ever got one of those books or tried to look things up online, it can be really overwhelming. A lot of books are written for the entire continent, And there's just a lot of things that don't happen here in Western Washington. So we went through and pulled out everything that was really specific to here that can happen to most gardens. We didn't cover some really exotic things you could grow in your garden. We covered basic vegetables. So it may not include everything, but it'll be really close. So you have those two handouts. Before we dive in any further, I have an activity for us to do. Yes, here we go. You're all familiar with the reaction buttons. We're going to do this together. Here's our fun part of our class. I am going to show you a bug, and I want you to vote with either the green circle with the check or the red circle with the X, whether you think this is good or bad for the garden. We're going to start off with an easy one. You don't see too many of them in the garden, but they fly around our gardens. What does everybody think? Good or bad for the garden? Almost all goods and one bad. Awesome. Thank you for participating. So this is a voracious predator of mosquitoes. And if you don't like mosquitoes, you want these guys around. Their children are born in the water. So you see these guys, you know there's a body of water somewhere, a creek, a pond, something where their children are born, and then they grow up and they crawl out and get their wings and morph and fly around and eat mosquitoes. So this is a beneficial, we don't want to put toxic stuff on the ground that might run off and negatively affect these guys. Here is one I'm sure you all know. How about this slug? What do you think? Good or bad for the garden? All bad? 7, yeah. Yeah, this is a bad one. This is an invasive type of slug that does not belong around here, correct? And they eat pretty much everything. And this is one of the worst things that can happen in your garden in Western Washington.
What kind of a slug is that?
They're referred to as Asian slugs. I don't know any more specific than that, but they are terrible for your garden. And we will go over extensively, oh, you're welcome, how to deal with them. How about this? This is a different slug you may or may not have seen around your yard. What do you think, good or bad?
Did you put the slug in the wrong category, by the way?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, cool.
Thanks. I see both good and bad, almost split down the middle in the market. Does anybody know what this one is? This is our native banana slug. They love to hang out in our forests and our oceans. They love to be out by the coast. Yes, we love banana slugs. They are great. They can come in different colorations, but they're quite a bit bigger than the brown Asian slugs. They can go anywhere from this yellow color to a very ripe banana pattern. They got lots of black marks on them. They shouldn't be a problem in your garden. I like to kind of leave them to the middle, to the side. They actually love to eat dandelions. If you're lucky enough to have them in their yard, just watch them. They tend to not eat our garden plants. But they're not really beneficial either. They're not helping out. Here's another one. What do you think? Good or bad for our garden? I'm seeing yes and no. Oh, almost tied. Oh, right down the middle. I love this one. Okay. The trick with these is to see what's happening up here. Look at these pinchers. You don't need to catch a plant, right? It turns out this is the adolescent form of this guy. How many of you have ever seen this or know what it is? Anybody? This beetle? And again, you don't have to take notes. We're going to go over all this in a minute. This is called, looks like a scorpion. This is a defensive posture. It's trying to say, leave me alone. You don't want to mess with me. This is called a rove beetle. They're also called a devil's coach horse. Everything has multiple common names. Be careful with that. And most beetles are predators. They have these nice pinchers on the front, and they go after the things that eat your garden. So these are the same animal, and they are great to have in the garden. You don't want to pick them up. You don't want to handle them. Some of them have some quite toxic stuff they emit from the joints in their legs that can irritate our skin. It's not super bad, but that's that defensive posture. Is like, hey, you don't want to mess with me. So it's meant to keep little animals from eating it. This guy's peeking around the corner. What do you think about this one? Good or bad for the garden? Couple of no's, couple of yeses. I love how almost tied these all end up being. Okay, not for you, but for the garden, these are great. This is a wasp. Yes, they can be a little scary, but believe it or not, they will pollinate and they will hunt some of the critters that eat your plants and go feed them to their children. So they are good. How about this one? If you saw this in the garden, would you go, oh, that's great, I'm going to leave you there? Or, oh, you're terrible, what are you doing? We've got some negative votes. All negative. Yes, this one is a negative. I don't know if I have my next slide. These are out of order a little bit. This is a bad one. These get called wired worms. And wireworms love to live in the grass. They can destroy lawns, but you really have to have a bad infestation for them to do that. Their cousins are different wireworms you see in the pet store. People buy them to feed to their birds or reptiles, pets. But the ones that we find outside, they're really small. They're an inch long and they're pretty thin. They're really hard to see. I have the adult form in here, but it's not coming up yet. Okay. What do we think about this one? Good or bad for the garden? Some good, one bad, mostly good. Yay. Mostly good, yes, yes. This is a millipede. This is our native millipede. We have other millipedes that can show up in our gardens. They are great decomposers. They love to eat decaying plant matter. Their jaws are not even strong enough to bite a healthy plant or you or your pets. They have really weak jaws, but they're great at making compost. So we like those guys. How about this? Good or bad for our garden? This beautiful yellow insect. Yeses and nos. More nos. Oh, you guys are so smart. Yes, does anybody know what this is? Any guesses? But you're spot on, look at that. Yes, this is a cabbage butterfly or cabbage moth. They get called different things. It is a butterfly. I don't know of any other really light yellow, almost white butterflies that happen around here. I'll find a good place for this. They are great pollinators, but their children, this one, are the ones that come along and eat your plants in the middle of the night. They often get called cabbage worms, but we know it's not a worm, it's a larva that just hasn't turned into a butterfly yet. Notice these nice veins on it. It's trying to blend in with the veins of the plant. They are excellent at hiding. I'll show you some more pictures of that later.
Wait, is that on the wrong side?
Oh, sorry. I keep getting confused. My bad. Sorry for the confusion. Thanks. Keep calling me out.
Wait, I thought the moth was good though. I mean, the butterfly, the cabbage butterfly itself.
It is. If you could keep it from laying eggs in your garden of the babies that are going to eat your plants, then it would be great. But that's almost impossible. So I always shoo them away or put things over my plants to keep them from getting to them. They're great, like if they're out in the flowers, but you don't want them anywhere near your vegetable garden.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. All right, how about this beautiful creature? Good or bad for the garden? We're split. Some goods.
All those blood veins or something, it looks like it has blood on it.
It does. It's just how the coloring of this critter. We're split down the middle, good or bad. This is really good for our gardens. Look at those pincers. Make sure I put it on the right side here. Here we go. It's going on the good side. This is the young instar, the larval stage of this guy. How many of you know what this one is? You do look like you're up to no good. Have you seen these flying around? These beautiful creatures. So not many animals have a wing that extends beyond their abdomen. That's one way you can tell them apart. And they have these beautiful wings. Yes, thank you. This is a green lacewing, yes. And lacewings are great at eating aphids. And they are natural and they are native. Not many bugs cross over from our natural native landscapes to the garden. Only a couple will, but eat our plants in the vegetable garden are usually really specific to vegetable gardens. This is one that will cross over. We love lacewings and their children.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Did you say that other is the larva of that green lacewing?
Yes.
And they both, what is the good thing they do?
They eat aphids.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, how about this cute little guy? Good or bad for the garden? Oh, look at you. All bads. All bads. Yes. This is a cabbage looper. It inches along. We would probably call it an inchworm. It is much the same as the cabbage worm. These are really high definition pictures. In real life, it's really hard to tell these two apart. They eat the same things, so not that important that you can tell them apart. How about this beautiful thing? Good or bad for the garden? A little bit of both. Getting more yeses, more goods for the garden. Yes, this is great for the garden. This is the teenager of the ladybug. And we all know ladybugs are good for the garden, right? Because they eat what? Aphids. Yes. So this is what their children look like. Nothing like the adults. They are really funky looking. But they are really great at eating aphids. Like all good teenagers, they eat way more than the adults. So we love them in this stage because they will just mow down a whole colony of aphids in no time. How about this guy? That's not the clearest picture. I had a hard time finding a good picture. So snuggly right there. What would we think, good or bad for the garden? Almost all bads and one good. Yes, this is bad for the garden. This is what we would call a cutworm. Sometimes they have more patterns and striping to them, and sometimes they're more plain grub-like in this form. And cutworms literally just cut plants down right at where they meet the soil, like a little lumberjack. And then they don't even eat the rest of the plant. They're sort of terrible. And I'm seeing if I can find the other picture. Yes, below red. Any ideas about ants? What do we think? Good or bad for the garden? Oh, we're tied. Oh, some more good. Yeah, these are tricky. So for the most part, ants churn the soil. They're really great for the soil. They do farm aphids, so if you see them on plants, it's usually because there's an aphid problem, and they're protecting the aphids from other predators, so that's bad. We want the predators to get the aphids. But ants don't eat plants. There's a couple out there that do infest some other, like, landscape type plants, but I've never heard of them attacking your vegetable garden. If they're on your plants, look really closely. There should be a colony of aphids nearby. They eat fungus and they eat the dew, the waste material from the aphids, what they're actually eating. Fire ants would be a problem if you're a gardener, like you wouldn't want those nearby. They can be a pain in high numbers, so I'm going to move them up to the top, but they're kind of in the middle. Like you don't want too many. They're going to make it hard to garden and be a pest. No fire ants. Those are terrible. Okay, how about a general spider? If you saw spiders in your garden, would you say that was good or bad for your garden? Some good, all goods. Yes. Yes, I've tried to make a general spider image. So spiders obviously don't eat plants, right? I do knock down the web builders because they always seem to catch the pollinators. Or I'll like scoop them up real quick and go toss them in the neighbor's yard or somewhere that doesn't have flowers that are gonna attract the pollinators that get caught in their web. Or the little ground spiders, those are great hunters. They'll help keep your garden clean. And I got one last one here. What do you think, good or bad for the garden? We keep our votes. Yeah. Good, good, good. Yes, one bad. Two bads. Yeah, this is the tricky one depending on what you know about praying mantises. For the most part, they can be good. They eat things that eat your garden. Bad, we're losing our native population. The invasive Chinese mantids have kind of taken over. They don't die off. Our winters aren't getting cold enough long enough. And they're a lot bigger. They can harm some of the other things that are helping out our garden. Sometimes they eat the good things too. Sometimes they eat the spiders. But especially when they're little, because they go through incomplete metamorphosis. They're young are really good at eating aphids because they're about the same size and they can just go right after them. So they're good for the most part.
Mary, we have a question about earwigs.
Oh yes, earwigs. Earwigs are fine as long as they aren't in high numbers. So you occasionally find them in ears of corn, right? That's where they get their name, not from crawling in our ears, but ears of corn. They love getting in the layers of plants, so things like corn and lettuces. They love getting down in those leaves and hanging out. Unless there's a whole bunch of them, they're not really that bad for the garden.
Can you explain what they do if they are in high numbers? Why is it they're good in low numbers but bad in high numbers?
I wouldn't say they're good in low numbers. I would just say they're not really a problem in low numbers. But high numbers, they can really take out a plant. Like if they were on an ear of corn and there's just one, they're just kind of munching on the green leaves. And if there was 100 of them on an ear of corn, they're going to devour those green leaves to the point where the corn is exposed. And I don't know if they actually eat the corn. I know they eat the leaves and ruin the ear of corn. So one or two here or there, couple is fine, but yeah, if you get a whole bunch, that can be a problem. And
Charlotte, I believe that roly-polies isopods are decomposers as well.
Yes, they are great for the garden. Good decomposers. And they can ingest heavy metals from the soil, which is pretty cool. All right, let me switch gears here. Good job on the quiz. So let's go to our notes. Oh, I missed it. There we go. So we've gone through bug facts. We're looking at chew marks. There's some other notes in here. Just remedies. All right. Let's jump straight to our critter and disease information. We've seen all these insects up close. Let's learn a little bit more about them. This is your tool that you can print out, take it out into the garden with you, and try and identify things. I put them in order by their most common referred to name. So in science, things get a common name, they get a scientific name. And there can be a lot of different common names for animals, and that's where it gets a little tricky. If you've ever lived anywhere else and you talked about this beetle being a June bug, and then you moved here and they're like, this is a June bug. Like, there are two different kinds of beetles. So be careful with common names. Aphids, at least, is a really common name that we all refer to. I tried to include any more information about the orders, classes, and classification to help you in your search. Whenever you go searching the interwebs for more information, make sure you type in as much information as you can. Don't just type in aphids on my cabbage. Type in aphids on my cabbage, Washington State. It's going to give you more specific information about right here. So, has everybody encountered aphids before? Let me see a hand or a yes. Yeah. They're one of the most persistent little things, and they will go after just about any plant, and they're mostly specific to types of plants. There are so many kinds of aphids. I don't even know how many, but there's a lot. And notice it's plural. It's never aphid. They are a colony species. They are always in high numbers. There's lots of them. So here's our description. There's some pictures, very small, usually light green, but they can be in other colors. They tend to blend in with the plant that they're eating. And they have a little tiny piercing mouth part. That's what they stick into the plant and are draining the plant of its fluids. So they are hiding from predators, so they often go for the underside of the leaf. And as they're sucking the juices out, it makes that leaf curl. So if you've got some curling on your plants, turn it over and look on the underside. Another dead giveaway that you have aphids are these little white pieces. They often end up on the leaf below. So this is what happens as they are morphing and going through that incomplete metamorphosis, and they're shedding their exoskeleton. They're leaving little drops of feces, so little tiny black dots. And then you see these little white pieces of exoskeleton falling as they're morphing. And that's how you know you've got aphids, if you can't see them, because sometimes they blend in really well and they're really tiny. They are found on just about everything that can grow in your garden, unfortunately. But the good news is there's lots of ways to deal with them where you don't have to use yucky chemicals. The easiest thing is to prevent them from happening in the first place. So row covers. Does everybody know what row covers are? Maybe? Let me show you real quick. So this is what row cover is if you've never seen it. It's a way to cover up your plants to keep things from landing on them in the first place. The hard thing with this, though, is you have to put it on right when you either sow the seeds or transplant them, and then keep it on there the whole time. And you got to tuck it in around the edges so that mamas don't get in there and lay their eggs. It does make it challenging to water. Like drip hoses and drip lines work much better when you use row covers. It does let the rain through and it does let the sun through, so you can leave it up all the time. Some are plastic. They get a little humid around here, and the wind can rip through them a little easier. The actual row cover fabric is kind of like thin landscape fabric. That works pretty well around here. I've seen some that's really, really thick that did not let water through, so try and feel it if you want to buy row cover. That's what that is. And then blasting with the hose. That sounds so sophisticated, right? But it totally works. So if you turn your hose on high, or you put your thumb over it, and you just blast them right off the plant, they go shooting. Imagine you're a little tiny insect and you go flying what's 2 feet to us. Might seem like a mile to them. And in these colonies, most of them are not adults yet. They don't have their wings. So they're not going to be able to crawl all the way back to that plant. A predator's going to get them. They're going to dry out. They're going to starve to death. Something. They're not going to make it. Yes, the adults could fly back, and make a problem, but they're just easy enough to hose off every couple of days if they really persist. But oftentimes they don't. They'll go find somewhere else to hang out. Encouraging beneficial insects is a way to find their predators, encourage them. All the things that we just talked about that were on the good side that have any kind of pinchers or bitey marks, or they're going to go after these guys and eat them up. Insecticidal soap. It sounds awful, right? It's not, I swear. It's literally just soapy water. Please don't ever buy insecticidal soap. They are selling you something you can make yourself for way cheaper. I find the easiest thing to use is any kind of natural plant-based liquid soap. Any of the 7th generation, the Ecos brand. I'm a big fan of Dr. Bronner's Castile soaps. They're all plant-based and organic. And then you mix it in water. I have a recipe in the class notes for the insecticidal soap to make your own. It is the fatty acids in the soap, the lipids, that dissolve their little exoskeleton. That's why it works so well. And if you notice, they don't have much of a hard exoskeleton, not like a beetle. They're much, much softer and it's really thin. So a little bit of that soapy water on them, it wipes them out right away. So my favorite thing to do is just to get an old spray bottle and make up this solution based on this recipe, which we got about, oh, where's my recipe? Oh, we'll get back to that. I have a recipe in the notes. It's about a capful for about a 32-ounce bottle, not much. I prefer the peppermint kind of Dr. Bronner's Castile soap because most bugs hate peppermint, so then it's just extra effective. And just squirt them, get them. It also blasts them off, but it gets out lipids and they can't make it. So those are great ways to deal with aphids. Any questions about aphids? We're going to go a little bit faster after this. I just want to set this one up really well. Neem oil, I hear, does work on aphids. I've never tried neem oil myself. I know it works good on houseplants. I haven't tried it outside myself, and neem oil is a citrus-based natural pesticide. Trap plants with marigolds. Yeah! Baiting animals away from others with things that they really like can work. I find that slugs also love marigolds, and then you gotta just keep planting them over and over, and sometimes it helps their populations grow, and sometimes it can bait them away and do what you're asking them to do and stay away from your prize plant. So I don't know, it's worth a try. It'll work for some of you, I'm sure. Okay, we're gonna keep going. So cabbage maggot, and maggot is just a word we use to describe baby flies, right? So it's the larval stage of that metamorphosis. Mama cabbage fly comes along and lays her egg right at the base of plants like arugula, bok choy, any of those cabbage plants. And as the eggs hatch, the larvae go in and they just start eating the roots. And before you know it, the whole plant comes loose from the base. It's hard to tell until it just falls over. And you pull up the root and you're like, oh, there's all these little maggots on it. There's nothing else that does this. It's a pretty weird phenomenon. So that's what happens when you get cabbage maggot. Row covers, preventing them from getting there in the first place. Planting polycultures. Planting is the same thing as kind of encouraging beneficials. Plant flowers nearby. Plant a variety of plants. Get that biodiversity going so that you attract those animals that are going to come be predators and maybe ward off the fly from laying her eggs there in the first place. As an adult fly, they're not going to do anything harmful to your plant, but they're going to lay eggs and cause problems. Rotating crops. Everybody knows to rotate their crops, right? You can't grow the same thing in the same spot year after year after year. One, it depletes the soil of whatever certain minerals and things in the soil that plant is using the most to grow. So you'd have to replenish just that particular thing, whereas if you mix and rotate your plants around, it will naturally replenish those things in the soil. And plants or bugs remember where your plants are. I don't know if they can pass that on in their DNA to their children, but it seems like they do. And as you put the same thing in the same spot every year, they come back every year like, oh, over there, Dawn's house, third corner on the left, they're going to have some great potatoes. Let's go get them. And as soon as they come up, boom, they just go. And some things will stay in the soil and they'll live in the soil over winter. And as soon as you plant, boom, they just pop right back up and attack your plant. It is the, oh gosh, I think it's garden planning, that class that happened back in March. Watch the recording. You can fast forward to the rotating crops piece in there if you're not sure how to do that. They have a whole formula for which kind of plant you're growing and how you should rotate that. That will greatly help reduce your risk of getting things that especially will hang out in the soil. Weed, meaning get all those weeds out of the way, because that's going to inhibit the predators from getting to the things that we want them to eat. And it takes away the nutrients in the soil from the plants we want to get the nutrients. So get the weeds out of there. Tar paper is like a black paper that you can lay down over where you're going to plant, and you just cut like a little X in where you put the seed or start, and it helps protect the base of the plant for the most part, so that that fly can't get there and lay their eggs. Just makes it harder for them. It also keeps the weeds down, and it kind of wears out by the end of the season, and you don't have much to deal with, and you can do it all again next year. And we talked about encourage beneficials, and then there's nematodes you can also buy at the store, and there's recipes depending on how you want to apply it or what it is you're trying to go for. But there are bad nematodes and there are good nematodes, and they're microscopic organisms that, unless you pull out your microscope, you can't really see them. But the beneficial ones will go after the little larvae in the soil. So that's a pretty cool way to deal with it too. All right, cabbage moth, cabbage looper, and the cabbage worm, they all basically do the same thing. Their adults are flying around, looking like pollinators, doing good stuff, but then they lay their eggs and their children eat your plants. I have a picture here I want to share with you of when I tried to grow, I don't remember now if it was cabbage or Brussels sprouts or what it was. But I started seeing these holes, and they don't even care. They don't go from the edge and work their way in. They just start eating indiscriminately. And you see the little poop marks? Do you see the cabbage worm? They blend in so well. So here's our little cabbage worm. Here's a little tiny one. That one's a little fuzzier to see. And here they are, broad daylight. They blend in with the veins of the plant, and you can't hardly see them. If you go out at night, you're more likely to see them because they're trying to hide during the day from the predators that are going to eat them. Yeah, little jerks. So it helps if you turn leaves over, go out there at night in a nighttime safari and get your flashlight and just start turning leaves over. You're more likely going to see the things that are causing problems in your garden at night than you are during the day. They're trying to hang out during the day and hide and conserve energy and water when it's hot out. So those are those two. They're great disguise. Hard to see. They just have some really interesting life stages. They're pretty, but damaging. They also have the butterflies have a black spot on their wings, so when they open it, you can see it. That's another way to tell them apart. Brown moth, that's tough. There's a lot of brown moths around here. We'll get to another one of those in a minute. Any questions about these fuzzy green guys before we move on? No. Okay. Carrot rust fly. This one usually isn't too bad, but it does attack carrots. Just looks like a regular old fly, and mama comes around. You know how carrots and parsnips, sometimes I think they go for radishes. They tend to poke out of the ground just a little bit, and that is all she needs to come lay her egg. And as the egg hatches, the larvae go through and just start eating the root. And they don't care. They don't stick to one side and work their way over. They just start eating. And for the most part, you can't really tell from the tops that anything bad is happening in the root below. So it's a bummer. You grow these things all summer long, and then you pull it up to harvest it, and you're like, "Aw!" And it's got all these brown, yucky stuff where they've tunneled through and left their waste, and it's hard to cut around it and salvage any of the carrot. Planting row covers, polycultures, rotate your crop. Beneficial nematodes in the soil will go after those guys. And another great trick I learned about was these carrot rust fly mamas can only fly about 2 feet off the ground. So if you got a raised bed, or you can get some mesh and stake it up so it's 2 feet tall, she can't even reach them, which is pretty amazing feat. So that can happen. How many of you have ever seen these little red chrysalises in the soil when you're getting your garden ready in the spring? Yeah. They're pretty common around here. They overwinter in our soil in this stage. So when we're digging around in the spring, they haven't hatched yet. And they wiggle, right? If you pulled them out and held them and they're like wiggling around, they can move. It's so weird. I don't know of any chrysalises that do that besides these guys. So this is the cutworm chrysalis. So we see them like this. And they can't crawl up the stem of things. They don't really have the legs to do that. They stay right in that first half inch or so of the soil. And they come along and they just, like lumberjacks, come cut down these little plants, especially our seedlings. And in the fall, they pupate and they overwinter, and then they come out as another brown moth. These guys are pretty easy to tell apart because they're poor flyers. So if you're walking through the garden, you see this little moth going, and it's just kind of hopping along. Maybe sick the chickens on them, because that's not a good one. You want laying more eggs. And they will go after most things, and they can cross over into lawns a little bit. Planting row covers, cutworm collars. That's a fun one to Google. You can use things like paper towel tubes, toilet paper tubes, and you just stick them in the soil a little bit, and they can't crawl over them to cut down the plants. If you have a really bad problem with them and you're trying to grow like a whole bunch of corn, or your bean stalks won't go, putting these little collars on will prevent them from eating that stuff. Or hand removal is always great. Row covers to prevent them from laying their eggs there in the first place. And I'll come up for breath because I see some more questions. Insects that are beneficial to vegetable gardens. They have other positive. Oh, what could be better than being beneficial for your garden?
I think they were asking about the non-beneficial insects, if they have any other role, beneficial role.
Other than food for the ecosystem, not that I know of. Anything prey on the Charlotte, does anything prey on what besides the nematodes? Was that up here?
No, the cutworms.
Oh,
It was when they're in that grub stage like that. Is there any, like, they're easy to pick up, right? When they're in the little
Yeah.
larval and grub stages. And what I want to do is throw them at something that will eat it. So I'm trying to think about what I could throw them at if I don't have chickens, which is a good idea in the chat there.
yeah. When I had a community garden plot, I would come across these every spring. I find them in both stages, and some other things I didn't want in my garden. And I was always trying to choke out the grass. My garden plot had a lot of just really tough grass that would not go away. So I always had a board and like a brick or something heavy on it to choke out the grass. And I started just throwing these things on that board, and the crows caught on really fast. And they're like up in the trees, like, oh, that lady's sticking some snacks out for us. Cool. And they'd wait till I turn around or walk away, then they'd fly down, they'd pick them up, and they'd fly off before I got back. So I've befriended some crows. That's also a fun thing to do. But especially these guys, you got to put them in something they can't wiggle out of, because they will find their way back to the soil and wiggle back in. Ugh, creepy. Same with these guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Any of the birds would love to eat them. Just put them in something they won't wiggle away on. And I think, nighttime too, if you leave them out in a like a dish or something, the raccoons and the opossums would love to snack on them. Okay, cutworms versus spray. I did list earwigs here, bad in high numbers, but if you just have a couple, they're really not that bad. And they do look creepy. Sorry. I'm gonna go to flea beetles here. Has anybody had to encounter these? Ugh. I hope not. These are a pain. I had to encounter these in my community garden plot one year. Actually, it was 2 years. I had a whole row of potatoes, and I noticed these little tiny holes were showing up in the leaves. And so I had to look it up. I called my garden friends, like, what is happening? This little tiny shot. What's happening on my leaves? And like, oh, those are flea beetles. And I really had to sit there and stare at the plants and look and go, oh, there they are. They're these cute little teeny beetles, and they jump like a flea, but you can actually squish them easier than a flea if you can catch them. They totally see you coming, and they're like, ah, boing, there they go. The adults are chewing these holes in the leaves, which really isn't a problem for the plant. The problem is their children are down in the soil in their larval stage, and they're eating your roots. They loved my potatoes, but anything in the ground, they're going to go for the roots, unfortunately, and they'll chew up the tops of the plants as well. So they were already a problem. I tried some of these other things. I ended up getting some beneficial nematodes. And for me, I just got this, it's in a little tub, and it's mostly vermiculite that's wet, and you can't see the nematodes. And I used it, I took about a third of it, and I diluted it into a bucket of water. Now around here we have fluorine in our water, so it takes about an hour, or 15 minutes for a gallon of water to evaporate that fluorine, because the fluorine is supposed to kill stuff, right? So we don't want it to kill the little nematodes. So a whole bucket, I let it sit there for an hour, evaporate off the fluorine, and then I added the nematodes, stirred it up, and then I poured it along the base of the plant to get it down into the soil to go after their children. And I did that 3 times based on the instructions on the box. And these are things you can buy in the garden center. And I also use diatomaceous earth. If you're not familiar what that is.
While you're looking that up, the nematodes come freeze dried, so you have to rehydrate them in the water.
That's what's
Most
happening.
a lot of other bugs that you get will just come live in a little tub, like ladybugs.
Yes. Thank you, Erin. So diatomaceous earth, this is what it looks like. This is a bag I actually have, and this is powdery stuff. They are fossilized single-cell organisms, diatoms, and there's all kinds of DE, that's what people call it for short, out there. There's food grade that you can ingest for whatever reasons, and there's the garden grade, or the earth grade, they're calling it here, that you can use in your gardens. And what it does is these little tiny organisms are sharp, so when you sprinkle it on the plants, it gets in their little joints and their little exoskeletons, and it dehydrates them. It draws all the moisture out of their little bodies. That's what it really does. I like to use one of those little sprinklers that you would have in your kitchen for like powdered sugar. That works really well because you can sprinkle it on the tops, sprinkle it get it underneath the leaves, and really coat the plant. It's not going to hurt the plant. It's going to go after these guys. It will go after anything else that lands on the plant too. That's one bad thing when you use some of these remedies. It's not going to just hit the ones you want. Anything that it comes in contact with, it can harm. So use it whatever way you're comfortable with. And be careful not to inhale it. That is a bad thing for your lungs. Any questions about flea beetles? No.
We have a question about, is earth grade the same as food grade?
I don't think so. And you'll notice like the food grade is usually in food areas or health sections, like with supplements and stuff, and the stuff for your garden is in garden centers, in the garden parts of the store, or if you're looking online, it'll tell you which is good for.
And is diatomaceous earth effective for aphids or just critters that are living down in the soil?
The diatomaceous earth is good for those on top of the soil. So I would use this for the adults and use the nematodes for the ones down in the soil. And it would work on aphids as well, I would think. Yeah, good questions. Okay, we have a lot to get through. This is normally a 2-hour class, and we're already after 7 o'clock. So I'm going to go a little bit faster here. You have these notes. You can go back and look at these things more in depth. Leaf miners is a pretty unique thing that happens around here too. It is a type of fly, and what they do, mama fly comes along, finds a nice leafy plant in your garden, artichokes, beets, all the lettuces, spinach, and she finds a leaf and she lays one egg. And she goes to another leaf and lays one egg. And as it hatches, it goes in between the layers of the plant, which we didn't even know there were layers, and they eat all of the chlorophyll, all the green stuff, to the point where it looks clear, where they've eaten all the plant. After it dries, maybe a day or two later, that starts to dry out and looks like this. But it's kind of got these tunnels. You'll notice all these spots are pretty much connected. If you picked it and held it up in the sky to the light, you would see one little wiggly guy moving around in there. And it's just beefing up to morph back into that fly. The easiest thing is hand removal, and don't put them in your compost. Don't put them in the yard waste bin. Put them in a garbage bag or something, tie it off, and then toss them, or feed them to your chickens or something that they can't get back out. But there's nothing else that does that kind of damage. It's a pretty weird looking thing. Oh, slugs. Oh my gosh. How many of you have problems with slugs? Yeah, I see Susan's hand. Yeah, this is the worst thing that can happen here in Western Washington in terms of pests. Yeah. There are lots of remedies out there. Prevention is great. It's hard to do. I think once you've got slugs, it's harder to get rid of them. So one of the things I've started doing is before I plant, when it's just starting to thaw out and the little tiny slug eggs are starting to hatch, and you go in the garden and you see these little teeny slugs, that's when I spread Sluggo. I'm comfortable using Sluggo. Now keep in mind there's two different kinds of Sluggo out there. There's the regular Sluggo that is safe for organic gardening. It is safe for wildlife, it's safe for pets. It's fairly water soluble, so you don't want to use it and then water or do it right before a heavy rain. That really knocks their populations down before I start planting. The other kind of Sluggo is Sluggo Plus. Terrible stuff. It kills everything. It is not wildlife friendly. It is not pet safe or anything like that. And it does not dissolve very quickly. It sticks around for a long time. So that can get into our water and kill all kinds of things on the way. Yes, feed them to your chickens if you find them. I've heard of people going out slug hunting at night, and you can just get a tub of beer, or some people get their snips, and you just hand remove. My favorite, once you've got them, is a beer trap. So I don't have a good picture of my beer trap with me, but if you take a sour cream tub or cottage cheese tub and you cut a couple holes near the top that are bigger than a quarter, keep the lid on, and then you pour in beer. I have found that they love an IPA. That seems to draw them out in broad daylight. I did that at my community garden. They installed this nice ditch right on the other side of my garden plot in the middle of my gardening years there, and they would just come eat everything at night, and then the day they go back, and I was like, oh, this is terrible. You're welcome, Linda. But prevention, right? So I try not to get them during the day. I've planted onions and garlic all along the fence where the ditch was, and that really worked to keep some of the smaller slugs out. The big guys were like, rah, I don't care, and they muscled right through it. I put a beer trap out while I was gardening one day in the middle of the day, and these huge slugs came out and went right into the trap. It was pretty amazing. They happy hour, right? They couldn't resist the IPA. So highly recommend slug traps. What you do with it when you're done, whatever you're comfortable with, it can be really gross when you get a couple of them in there. Eggshells, they work, but you have to have a lot of eggshells, and you have to keep doing it because they break down pretty quickly. It's the shards that they don't like running over. And then there's copper tape that can work more for like a little container or something. So I had a problem because those slugs would come in the middle of the night and eat everything I planted. I started planting them at home and then bringing them over, but they were coming up my deck where I had my start. I was like, I can't evade the slugs. So I started putting the little pots on a table on my deck, and then put a little bit of that copper tape around the bottoms of the legs of the table, and they wouldn't cross that copper tape. You gotta get the thick, like 1.5 inch stuff, because the copper arcs on their bellies will electrical charge when they try to cross it. It does oxidize after a couple of years, so you have to change it a lot, but it does work.
Can you also use it as sandpaper on the copper so you don't have to buy a whole bunch of new copper pipe and tape?
Yeah, and I having that come up in our class on Saturday, or putting like the really rough sandpaper along the tops of your raised beds or something. I've never tried that. I would think it would work, and it wouldn't break down as fast as the copper tape. Would be kind of cool. Any other tips or questions about slugs before we move on? No. Okay. Spit bugs, they happen, usually they don't happen in really huge numbers. They do love grass. They're an animal that'll cross over from our wild landscapes. So if you're planting your garden near a field where there's lots of tall grass, the grass gets the spittle bugs, they'll come into your garden. They're usually not a problem unless you get a whole bunch, and they're really soft-bodied, even in their adult phase, and they froth up this foam from their back legs, and they emit this stuff, and they just hide in that foam. That's their protection. I find just wearing a gloved hand and going in there and hand squishing them works pretty well. You can blast them with the hose or cover everything to keep them from getting on there in the first place. And then our last critter we're going to cover here is our wireworm. This is the adult of the wireworm. It is a click beetle. It is a native bug. And these little points on its thorax are what give it away. When it feels threatened, it bends backwards and goes click, and it jumps about a foot. That's its defense. But their children are terrible, and they will eat some of your root vegetables. They like glans as well. So thinking about all the things that we sorted, the characteristics they have in common, the bad ones tend to be the squishy ones, the ones that blend in, that are trying not to be seen. They tend to blend in with the things they're eating, whereas the good guys tend to look a little bit more vicious. They tend to have pinchery things or pokey parts. Those are actually the ones that creep us out, but that will help our garden. So if you take nothing else away from this class, take that away. Give context to these guys. Just sit there and watch them for a second and see what they're doing before you start squishing things. I do list on here some of the beneficial things because people kept asking, well, what is this? Well, what is this? And there's a lot of really weird things out there, and they help our gardens in lots of ways. There's always an exception to the rule with our click beetle. Usually beetles are good, but the click beetle and the wireworm are bad. This is a tricky one. This hoverfly, they are great pollinators. They are a fly that they're mimicking these stinging insects, but it doesn't have a stinger. And their maggot, or their larva, are a little green squishy thing you might see on a plant and go, oh, green squishy things are bad. This one is quite a bit smaller, but if you just look, it's actually eating the aphids. So we want to keep them around. So just keep that in mind before you start killing things. Just look at it for a second. What is it doing? Okay, let me jump back to our notes real quick. There's integrated pest management steps to keep in mind when you're trying to troubleshoot your garden. Prevent things first, and then do some physical removal of things. And if you need those don't work, and you move on to some organic or non-toxic remedies like beer traps or diatomaceous earth. If that doesn't work, you can move on from there if you're comfortable. But always read instructions and follow those instructions. That'll help keep from polluting our environment. That leaves us a few minutes to talk about diseases. Any questions before I transfer our conversation to diseases? I know that was a lot of information in me talking at you. Thank you for your patience. Anything? Shield bugs. Yes, you know, shield bugs weren't a bad thing when we made this class 11 years ago, but they have certainly popped up more that the climate's changing. For the most part, in vegetable gardens, shield bugs or stink bugs are not bad that I have heard of. No, they can get in like our lilac trees and some other things, but not your vegetable garden. Thank you. Beetles that are yellow and look like ladybugs, good for the garden. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know what bug that is, Bridget, off the top of my head. Diseases. Okay. 3 things have to happen for disease to take root. Now imagine the whole plant is looking sad, it's turning funny colors, you see it moving down the row and spreading. That's how we know it's a disease, because we've given it healthy soil, it's not malnutrition. So here's what has to happen. The pathogen must be present. Things just don't get sick out of thin air. And it has to come from somewhere. Some things can travel in the wind like fungal spores, and other things have to come from touching something else. If you have your garden shears and you're pruning this plant that is just sad and it's gross and it's clearly got a disease and you're trimming off all the bad parts, and then you go use those same shears on a healthy plant, you're going to transfer that disease. You must have a susceptible host plant. You can cut the diseased parts off that plant and say it's a, let's say it's a cabbage plant and it's got some wilt. And then you go use those snips on a corn plant. It's not going to get that same wilt because it can't affect that type of plant. Most of the diseases stick to the family of plant that it is, but it will get all those different plants in that family. So it has to come from somewhere. And the environmental conditions must be so that the plant actually gets affected by it. Broken plants is the best way to transfer diseases. If your kids or your dogs go crashing through your garden and break leaves, that leaves them exposed and able for fungal spores to land on there and infect the plant or whatever. If the plant is really healthy and it's not just waterlogged, it's gotten overwatered, it's been really wet and rainy, that can lead to it being more susceptible. But if it's all nice and healthy and it's spread apart, it's getting lots of air, it's not overcrowded, they can usually fight things off all on their own. So all those 3 things have to happen in order for things to take hold. There are 3 different types of diseases: bacterial, fungal, and viral. Of all the bacterial diseases, there's rots and wilts. And think of like a human with bacterial infection, you know, things are runny and oozy and kind of gross. So if you're like, this plant doesn't look right, and you go to cut off the bad part and it kind of, it's gooey when you cut it apart, it's a bacterial problem. There are no remedies once infections have sent in. Oh. So I thumbed through all these books and they all say the same thing when it comes to any infection. Add organic material. That's the best thing you can do, is to help your plant fight it off yourself. Give them all the good conditions to fight it off themselves as well, but sometimes things happen. Of course, Western Washington fungal diseases are the worst types that are going to take hold because it's so moist here. The key is to not overcrowd your garden and don't water the tops of the plants. They don't like that. A lot of them hate that. Like the nightshades, they don't like their leaves to get wet, and especially don't like it when you water them right before nighttime and they go to bed wet. They don't like that. These are the different types of diseases that can happen. And if you've been here any sort of amount of time, you know that the mildews come and they're powdery, they're kind of a milky color, or they're dark and they're black. Yeah, those are our types of diseases. And there are different things that attack different types of plants. Here in the notes, we've got some fungal remedies. I've never tried them myself, but there are things out there that you can try. I know somebody before asked about what was it? Oh yeah, powdery mildew. So in the critter disease information sheet, I list them by family because whatever happens to, say, onions is going to happen to anything in that family. These are the most common things that happen. Most of them aren't too bad and are prevented easily by rotating your crops, giving them lots of air, not using your dirty disease gloved or snips on healthy plants. But powdery mildew is just one that happens to most of our cucurbits, our gourds. It just happens. If it happens when it's still making flowers, then it can deform the fruits, or the squashes, the gourds. But if it happens later, which I've seen it almost happen every time, later in the season after they've already made their fruiting bodies, it's not a problem. It looks unsightly, but you can plant resistant cultivars. But if you're gardening where other people garden too, especially, those things just spread around so easily around here. So these are some of the things that can happen. You can Google image search things if you do have a problem, but I've gardened for a long time and I hardly ever get diseases. Prevention is key. Another thing to keep in mind is those lawn sprinklers. I know some people use those to water their gardens, those are terrible. Don't get the whole plant wet. You can get those extensions for your hose with a little sprinkler end and get the way down water at the base. It's just the roots that need the water, right? The water spores can spread fungal spores all over your garden, and that can be a bad thing. Dogs running through your garden and then running through your neighbor's garden, that can spread things too. So trying to keep everything out that's going to transfer things around can also help. Avoid overcrowding. I can't say that enough. I know it's hard if you have small spaces, you want to plant as much stuff, but if you overcrowd stuff, that just makes more places for things to hide critter-wise and for things to get damp and for the different fungal problems to set in. Okay, is there any questions about diseases? We're almost done.
Mary, someone asked, do you or anyone else have any experience with Be Safe 3-in-1? I looked it up on their website. It seems like it's just kind of a mix of sesame oil and some fish extracts. Looks very natural and organic as far as I can tell.
I haven't heard of that. I don't have any experience with it. Anybody else? No. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to look into that one.
Oh yeah. Hello. Oh, I was wondering if your leaves have does that mean it's diseased or that the aphids or bugs have gotten to it?
Can you ask that one more time? Sorry, you
The
cut out.
holes are yellow. Oh, if the leaves on the rose plants have holes in them or turn yellow, does that mean there's disease or bugs that have gotten?
On a rose plant?
Yes, on the rose plant.
Oh, yes. I don't know much about ornamental plants. I am a vegetable garden person. All kinds of things go
okay.
after roses, though. I don't know. Sorry.
If
They
there
are
are little
okay.
holes, it's probably an insect.
Insect, okay.
probably.
So I should get some ladybugs.
You can, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. There are a couple other handouts that I'm gonna have Erin stick the links in the chat that could be useful. These are free downloads from WSU. Pest control and home vegetable gardens. They will talk about some harsher chemicals than I'm comfortable using, but if you're comfortable using them and if they're used properly, they're not supposed to be that bad. But they also have a organic pest control and vegetable gardens handout that is very detailed. It does go over a lot of the stuff that we just covered, but in a little bit more fine detail or in a different way that hopefully can be helpful to you.
Mary, do you know if after the Zoom ends, if they'll still be able to see the chat and open up some of these links?
Yes, so the Zoom recording keeps, we keep it in Zoom. I know Harvest Pierce County turns theirs over into YouTube videos and they lose the chat, but ours stays in Zoom, so you will be able to get the chat and the links. They won't be hot links like this. You'll have to copy and paste them, but they will be there. Yes. And then lastly, before we let you go, we have the class evaluation. We would love your feedback, good or bad. Do you have any ideas for other classes or something you think I should have hit on or something you love that we talked about? Any kind of feedback keeps these programs going. And suiting our audience the way they need to be met. So I appreciate taking the time to fill out that feedback. Is there anything else? I'm going to stop sharing before we let you go.